All right, so a new series with an ever-present God in every inch of life. And with Ordinary Time, we're talking about how God is with us throughout the daily activities that we have. And we kind of like to make God extra special. It feels like God's this spiritual being that is not very earthly, of a different place, and all of a sudden we have to take this thing called faith and spirituality and Christianity and then superimpose something that's totally foreign to human nature upon us and try to be entirely different beings than we naturally are. And you can kind of see this play out if you meet somebody who would be labeled like extra religious, or even if somebody finds out that you are a church-going person or are religious. You ever notice how their demeanor changes? Like they just saw a cop or something? I do this when I meet with families for going through funerals. They immediately have like their guards up. If they're not a religious church-going folks, they have their guards up. Like they're talking to a police officer, like I can hand out spiritual tickets if they say the wrong word or something, it's really funny in a conversation, not a funeral, and then they find out later I'm a pastor, and then you can see them think through everything that they've said up to this point to see did I say anything I shouldn't have said? Did I do anything I shouldn't have done? Did I reveal anything I shouldn't have revealed? And it's really weird how we think this faith thing makes us other than human. Makes us like spiritual beings that are from other planets or something, like we're aliens that landed here. And all of a sudden we don't fit in to the culture around us and we're just oddballs around us. But the doctrine of the incarnation tells us that God becomes human and dwells among us. And so our faith should be very similar to that because that's who we worship. And that's who we're trying to, that's what Ordinary Time is we learn the pattern of Christ's life and then we live that pattern out in our everyday lives. And God is with us in every inch of our life. It's not just when you go to church. It's not just when you enter a religious building or when you pray in the morning or read scripture or whatever you do to connect with God. God's with you through the rest of it too. And so faith doesn't necessarily give us something extraordinary. Faith gives us the power to be ordinary and not have to be impressing people with all these different spiritualities. See, God is with us, which means that God is in the fabric of our everyday lives. And what I think that we did as human beings is that we took this concept of the Greek Zeus, and then we baptized it and called him Yahweh and then put him back up in the clouds. And he's got a lightning bolt in one hand for when you do what you shouldn't do. And then he's got a magic wand of blessing in the other hand in case you do what you should do. And he's just up there waiting and saying, okay, how are you going to be today? Which version of me are you going to encounter today? Am I going to blast you with a lightning bolt or am I going to, dust some, Tinkerbell dust? What is that stuff called? The fairy pixie dust. Thank you. Am I going to, the pixie dust of blessing on your life today? Because you did it good. You did it right. Oh, you didn't do it right. I'm going to have to do the lightning bolt on you this time. That's Zeus. That's not God. That's not Yahweh. God becomes human and dwells among us. And so God is with us. And what faith is doing in our lives is not giving us access to something that we don't have, but it's giving us eyes to see what is real, what is around us in the ordinary everyday lives that we live. So we don't have to try and be extra human. We don't have to try and be extra spiritual. We just have to figure out who we are and exercise that with God's presence with us. So God is with us all. And the Bible gives us a couple of clues about how we're going to find this God in our everyday life. Because we know, I've been in a plane, I've been up in the clouds, I didn't see God up there. There was no white throne. You picture heaven and you picture the Bugs Bunny stuff where people are up there with wings and a harp and there's all these clouds everywhere. And then there's just gates. And then you go through the golden gates and I'm okay, that must be what heaven is like. I've been up in the clouds in a plane. I didn't see it. I didn't see it at all. That's not what it's like. God is not up there away from us. We just did Pentecost and it says that God indwells our very bodies. God is our very breath, when we're breathing. So God is a lot closer than the guy in the sky that we think it is. So then we have to say, how then do we interact with this God? How do we experience this God? Where is the evidence in our life? The Bible gives us a couple of clues. The Bible tells us that God is love. Like, that's the definition that John gives of God. God is love. That's pretty cool. I like that one. That's something that I can actually understand. If that means that if God is love, that's a noun. And that's an experience of love, is an experience of God. So that means there's different kinds of love. So not like I love pizza and all of a sudden I've experienced God. Sometimes it feels that way when you take the first bite. I'm going to say, I'm just going to be honest. I really like the dairy-free, gluten-free day of pizzas in the freezer section. Those are good stuff. Now, the experience of love is an experience of God. We're going to talk about divine love, which is agape. And you've all experienced this before in your life. So that means that you've experienced God. Agape love is a love that is concerned for your welfare. Have you ever ran into somebody that was concerned about your welfare above their own? Have you ever had that experience? You have experienced God because God dwelt in that space between the two of you as the love experienced. That's what agape love means. It's a love that is a concern for your welfare. And it's a kind of love that Christianity actually injected into the world and in society back in the day. It's a love that actually, it makes us. Like a parent, they provide a home for the kids, and then the kids grow up in a home and they learn how to be little humans in this world, right? They are made by the love of parents. That's agape love. Have you ever found a home where you just belong? You found a place where I can fit here. These are my people. They have a concern for my welfare and it's giving me a safe space to exercise my identity here with them. That experience of love is an experience of God because God is love. So in between you and that community right there, that is an experience of God because God, if we understand the Trinity, it's not about just the points, it's about the lines between the points. The relationship that God has with the Son and God has with the Spirit and all these things. It's about that flowing, loving, communal relationship because God is love and God is community according to that very core doctrine of the Christian faith. So every time we experience that in small flavors, we experience God. And it's a love that's unconditional. Unconditional love is not something that we really experience a lot because we always love with conditions. Like, I'll love you as long as you stay in line, as long as you do this, because we understand that there's consequences to disobedience and all that stuff. But this unconditional love is more than we understand. It's beyond what we understand. This kind of love, the love that's unconditional, the kind that gives us a safe space to find out who we are, and the kind that's concerned for our welfare, when you experience those things in your life, you're experiencing small tastes of God because God is love. And then we understand that God is life itself because spirit and breath and life are the same word in the Greek. And so God is life, which means that when you feel that aliveness, when you feel that motivation for when you're inspired to get something done, when you're experiencing that connectedness of feeling like you belong, that is an experience of God. Because God is in the space in between of relationships, because God is life and God is love. And faith gives us eyes to see what that is and arms to embrace it as it is. And then, most importantly of all, it gives us an aim, something to do with it. That's what faith does, an intent. Because naturally, we know that the Bible calls sin something, right? We have sin in our lives. And this is because we are blind, we are proud, and we are selfish beings bent that way. We naturally bend that way. And faith wakes us up from our blindness. Faith actually gives us humbleness for that proud feelings. And faith gives us arms, it gives us an aim to say, you know what, there's something bigger than my own agenda in this world. And I want to be a part of something bigger than that. And those are the experiences of God in this world. When we experience that between the relationships we have with ourselves and other people and the communities and the physical creation. Thomas Burton says this: love is our true self. Love is where we came from, and love is where we are going. Like that encapsulates the Christian faith so well in intention. And then Howard Thurman, one of my favorite people, he says, the experience of God is a dynamic experience of energy flowing from God through human to human. When you experience those loving, alive moments in your life, you're tasting the divine right there in your life. Faith gives you eyes to see what it actually is and what's happening. And then it gives you arms to embrace it and say, I am loved. God is here with me now. And then it gives you an aim in saying, this isn't just for me, but there's something I can do in this world with this aliveness. Walk through. Now our passage today is out of Matthew, and we have this interesting section before that discussion on fasting. Matthew is called to be a disciple of Christ. He says, Jesus comes up to him and he says, come and follow me. Now this is totally unexpected. We wouldn't expect Jesus to call Levi the tax collector and then rename him into Matthew. He actually wrote the Gospel of Matthew here. He's the contributing author for Matthew. He's the most unexpected disciple I could think of. I would think that, the fishermen, I understand that. They're underdogs. The society was set up so that if you were the top of the class, in your class, you graduated valedictorian 4.0, and you got all the creds, then you can go on to the higher schools of thought, master's degree, doctorate degree. And if then you graduated at the top of your class of all those things, then you would go up to a rabbi and you say, can I be your disciple? I think I got what it takes. I'm top of my class. I'm head of the game. And if the rabbi looked at you and was like, I don't think so. Then you had to go home and pick up the trade, like fishing. So when Jesus goes up to fishermen and says, hey, you guys, come follow me, that's backwards than in society normally is in these days. He's like, the fishermen are like, whoa, holy cow. A rabbi came up to me and says, I want you to be my disciple, come follow me. Now, these fishermen, a lot of the disciples were fishermen. That kind of makes sense if you like the underdog story, right? Like, these guys have been rejected by society. They were like, they graduated like I did from high school with like a 2.7. It was like good enough. We're just good enough. We're just going to go be fishers and do what we're going to do, right? And then Jesus is like, that's who I want. I want the underdog. I want somebody who's not head of the class, who doesn't have all the answers. That makes sense to me. But Matthew does not make sense to me. Matthew is a tax collector. It's totally backwards. It's totally a surprise. We're not supposed to think, oh, good idea, Jesus, call a tax collector and be your disciple. This is good. The people reading this would have been like, why in the world is he calling Matthew this tax collector? Because he's a sellout. Nobody likes this guy. I mean, if you work for the IRS, you going to tell anybody? Right? It's like, oh yeah, you're that person. Right? You're not going to have a lot of friends, probably. If you're in the IRS, I'm just apologies in advance. But this is what it's like. I'm sure you're a good person. I'm sure you're a wonderful person. But your job labels you as something, and that's where Matthew is. You see, Roman society came in, they took over everything, and they said, we like your religion, but you have to have ours too. And we like your culture, you have to have ours too. We like your society, but you have to have ours too, and then pay us taxes. And then you get all these benefits. That's how they took over the world. They didn't have military might that just went in and demolished everybody. Well, they'd do that if they said no. But they'd show up to a city with their big armies behind them, and they'd say, hey, we're the Roman government. We would like to take over. And if we do, you get, all of our temples and our gymnasiums and our education system and our roads and our military. You get all this good stuff. And they're like, okay, what happens if we don't? We kill you. Okay, I guess we're going to have to do this, right? Like that's how they took over the world. They didn't go in with armies and crush everybody. They just said, you can still be you, but you have to add us on top of it and then pay us taxes. Now, if you are from the Hebrew race in this time, that's not cool. So they actually grandfathered them in and says, well, you don't have to worship Caesar, but you still have to pay your taxes. And so then there is this thing about how do we be Jewish people in a Roman government taking over society? How do we do this? And they had a couple of streams of thought. Some people are like, let's just, screw it. Let's go out to the desert. They're not there. We'll just hang out in the desert. John the Baptist was one. Then we had Judas of Iscariot. He was part of the Zealot tribe. They're like, well, we'll just bide our time, keep our swords on our right here, and then when the time is right and the Messiah comes in and claims the throne and cleanses the temple, we'll all grab our swords and kill everybody. And then God will bless us. That's the Zealot approach to what do we do with the Roman government. And then you have the Sadducees who are like, well, let's just get rich. And they did. That's all they did. They're like, Roman government, we don't care. We're just going to get rich. And then you have the Pharisees, and they're like, well, it's bad, but we don't know how to do anything with it, so we'll just tell people it's bad. And then when they try to do something with it, like, they would tell people you shouldn't pay your taxes with Roman money because Roman money is tainted because it has Caesar's face on it, and he's a god, and now it's pagan money, which is an idol. So once you touch money, then you're like unclean. So there's all these different approaches to what do we do about Roman occupation. Matthew is a sellout to them all. Nobody likes Matthew. He's the guy that's going to show up on your doorstep and say, time to pay your taxes. And then if you don't pay your taxes, then he's going to bring police and you're going to go to debtor's prison for the rest of your life. Not a cool trade. Not a lot of people like you. The Roman government doesn't like you because you're not a part of them, but you're giving them money, so they put up with you. And then your family doesn't like you, and the society doesn't like you, the town doesn't like you. You are just absolutely isolated. Nobody likes Matthew. He's a sellout. He's unclean. He's an outsider. And Jesus goes up to him and says, hey, follow me. I think you can change. I think you can learn how to not extort people and how to not be so afraid of being yourself and just kind of chameleon into these wherever location you are. You just chameleon yourself to each one. He says, I think you can actually learn who you are. I think you can actually repent of your extortion of the people. And I think that you can be my disciple. That is absolutely like, whoa. He called a tax collector. Nobody likes this guy. But he knew that he could change. He knew he could do something. Richard Rohr says something. We do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. That's important. Because how we think about the world, like actually it shapes how we live in this world. It shapes our actions. But then how we live in this world shapes our thinking. So you can't just think your way through the problems of your life. It's good to think about them. But you cannot think your way through the problems of your life. You have to live yourself through them. You have to start acting differently, and then you start thinking different thoughts. When you start living differently and acting differently in the world, it shapes your brain to say, oh, maybe this can work. Maybe I can be different. Maybe I can change. And Jesus believed that about Matthew. He says, I think this guy can change. Now, when he invites Matthew into his group of fishermen, and he's like, hey guys, welcome our new disciple to the group. This is chapter 9, so we're kind of involved. What do you think they're going to think? They're going to be like, he doesn't belong here. I remember the time when he took over half of my fish because he claimed taxes on them, but then he also patted his own pocket with them. So, just imagine how tense this is. When Matthew comes up, he's like, hi guys, it's me. I'm going to be one of you now. And everybody's looking at him like, this guy do not belong here. We need to somehow convince Jesus to get this guy out of the club because he does not belong with us. But there is a hard truth here because they believe themselves to be better than him. And they need to unlearn that. And the truth is a wonderful thing. I love what Thomas Merton, he says this, the beginning of love is the will to let those we love be perfectly themselves. The resolution not to twist them to fit our own image. Now that's not the end of love, that's the beginning of love. The beginning of love says that when I encounter you, I let you be you. And I learn about you, and I see how I can contribute into your life. My love is not based on a condition of, okay, I like you and I love you, but are you going to conform to my patterns of thinking and then I'll accept you? Thomas Merton says the beginning, the doormat of love. If you want to enter into the house of the love, the doormat that you enter on is that you have to let those you love be perfectly themselves. That's hard, because here comes Matthew on that doormat. And the disciples are like, that guy doesn't belong here. He extorted me. He extorted my family. He took from me. This is not a good deal, Jesus. I don't know what you're thinking, but here you are. And Matthew's here. And then they have to then learn the humanity of Matthew and learn that he's an actual person and learn that he can change. And you know what happens when you get to know someone that you like had all of these presuppositions in your mind and prejudices around, you get to know that person, you're like, actually, we got a lot more in common than I thought. Actually, maybe he does belong here. And then you start to look at your life and you're like, wow, I didn't know I was such a jerk on the inside. And then the disciples, I'm sure they were thinking like, oh, we get it. We don't belong here either. We were dropouts. We didn't make it here. There's nothing of our own. Jesus called us to be here. We don't belong here just like Matthew. And so all of a sudden it's, oh, he doesn't belong to, but neither do we. So I guess there's that. And Maya Angelou, one of my favorite poets of all time, she captured this understanding. She says, I belong everywhere. I belong nowhere. What the heck does that mean? Right? Like when you look at the surface level of who you are and your actions and thoughts and intentions, there is a selfishness that's there. We're all human. We're all looking out for our own interests. And then we encounter this ultimate love that accepts us unconditionally. And we're like, I don't belong here. And yet, when then you that love opens your eyes to the interconnectedness of everything, you're like, wow, every human is my brother, every human is my sister. I love creation, I belong here, this is my home. And that first doormat experience of that love that is like, oh man, I do not deserve this. And then you open the door and you come inside, you don't stay on the doormat, that's not where you stay. You're like, oh, I don't deserve this. That's not humility. Then you open the door and you're like, I do belong here. This is my home and you are my people. Did you know that when your mind's made up, you can't see where you're right? When your mind's made up, you can't see where you're right. Truth's gonna set you free, but first it's gonna make you miserable. I love that quote because it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. When your mind is totally made up, you're like, I got life all figured out. I got faith all figured out. I got, everything is all figured out. And if everybody else could just conform to the way I see things, the world will be a much better place. I think we all in this room have felt that before. We're all like, if everybody could just do it this way and do it my way and do it the way I see it, everything would work a whole lot better. Now, when you've got your mind made up like that, you can't see the areas where you're right because you're not all wrong. Nobody's all wrong. There's areas of your life where you can see and you're like, okay, actually this is good and this is good and this is good because you just paintbrushed the whole thing. You said, I'm right and I'm good. You can't see the areas where you're right when your mind's totally made up. When your mind's totally made up, you can't see where you're limited, where you got a half truth, but then there's more to it that's going to shape it. Right? Audre Lorde said this, it is not our differences that divide us, it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Dang, that's a good one. Because when your mind is made up, you can't see where it is that you're limited. You can't see where you have snippets of truth, but it's not the whole truth. And then when you only have snippets, guess what you do? Your brain starts to fill in the gaps. And then you start to fill in the gaps with, this part is a partial truth, but then I filled it in with something that might not be all the way true. And when your mind's totally made up, you can't see where you're wrong. Howard Thurman said, the experience of God or the divine encounter is generally a surprise. It comes unexpectedly as though it came out of nowhere. It is the thing that appears in the midst of the ordinary moments of life. And when we have our minds absolutely made up, we cannot see where we are right, we cannot see where we're limited, and we cannot see where we're wrong because we're painting with the broadest paintbrush there is possible. And when you live inside of your perceptions, you cannot experience things that are beyond your perception. You cannot experience a different culture, a time, a society, a tribe, a group, a political party, a nation, a religion. You can't experience anything outside of your own perception and find anything good in it if you have your mind absolutely made up that you have it all put together. That's where this next story comes into mind, where the Jewish leader comes to Jesus and he says, my daughter has died, but if you come and lay your hand on her, she will live. And this man has his mind made up. He had his mind absolutely made up. I know what's right. I've gone through the entire system. I've learned everything. And now I'm a leader of it all. And then something like the wild card throws in, and he loses his daughter, and now his mind is not made up anymore. He's got questions, and he comes to Jesus. Literally, he has a come to Jesus moment, right? And he's trying to figure out, how is it that I'm this insider, and I'm experiencing things outside of what I had figured out? I don't know if you've ever had that in your life, where you had it all figured out, and then a wild card comes in, and you're like, I don't know, that doesn't fit. But it's here. What do I do with that? And that's because we had our minds absolutely made up. We can't see where we're right or limited or wrong, because it's just painting with the broadest strokes possible. But Jesus here paints this picture. There's two healings that happen. It happens really fast. Like, he paints with this broad, hold on, my notes are all messed up. All right. The insider comes to him, the leader of it all. And what happens? But he kneels. He kneels down and he says, if you will come, just lay your hand on her and she will live. So the insider, the one who's gained all the power, he actually kneels down and asks for help. This is a show of humility that this man needed to do. He had to step out of his ivory tower, come down to base ground level, and ask for help. Now, C.S. Lewis says humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. You don't have to think less of yourself. That's not humility, that's degrading. You just don't have to think so much about yourself all the time. And this man has finally come to the place where he needs to step out of the ivory tower of wielding his power and authority and might and all this stuff. And he comes to Jesus and he kneels. And what does Jesus do? But the verb there says that Jesus stands. That's a powerful phrase. This man kneels and Jesus stands. He's like, let's do this. He is responding to the man's humility. He says, you have just entered the doorway through properly. Now he starts to go, and then this woman comes and he just kind of sneaks up on him and grabs the hem of his garment, and then she's healed. And this woman, she's the outsider, because she's got a flow of blood, and Jewish law says that she's unclean and she has to stay on the outside. She has to wear a bell that warns people when she's coming, and nobody's allowed to touch her. She's this total outsider. And she's a woman in a patristic society. So she has no authority, no power, no anything, and she's made outside by this flow of blood that she has. So she's an outsider in need of healing. And the great theologian, Michael J. Fox, said this: acceptance does not mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is and that there's got to be a way through it. That's this woman's mindset. Now this woman, she actually steps up. She has this low view of herself. She steps up. She sneaks up to Jesus. She's like, I don't even got to bother the guy. I'm just going to touch his cloak, and then it'll heal me. She has bold faith. She doesn't even need to talk to the guy. She's totally cool. So the Jewish leader steps down out of his ivory tower, and she steps up, and now they're on level playing field. And so the doorway that these two individuals needed to come to Jesus was different. The man needed humility. The woman needed boldness. Do you see how that works? The doorway, we're going to get into the same room, but the doorway to get into that room was different for the both of them because where they stood in society. And this woman enters, she steps up and she comes in through bold faith, and it says that Jesus turns and sees. Those are the two verbs that it uses of Jesus when it sees her. And then she has this acceptance. It's like, go, daughter, your faith has made you well. Those are powerful words. They're words of accepting, and they're words of inclusion. You are a daughter. And he turns and he sees her. And these two different actions by two different people, one an insider, one an outsider, one with power, one with nothing. They both come to the level ground, one through humility and one through boldness. And they meet Jesus there, and Jesus responds in each one because that's what faith looked like for the both of them. One was stepping down, one was stepping up. And there is space at the table, but the doorway to enter was different. And Bell Hooks said this: the kingdom of God is not a place, it's a state of mind, a way of being with one another. And when we understand that, that's what the kingdom of God is about. The kingdom of God is the rule and reign of God on earth. And when we understand that it's not a place, that we're trying to get to. It's a state of mind that looks at people, that looks at this world. And then, yes, when we pass away, we enter into a different place altogether where that state of mind becomes where you inhabit. I don't know what that's like. It'll be great to see it. But the kingdom of God for us who walk this earth now is not a destination far off into the future. It is actually a state of mind, a way of being, a way of walking with one another. And God is experienced in and with each other. Evelyn Underhill, here it is. Evelyn Underhill. She said, eternity is not an unending succession of days in the calendar, but something more, like the music of a great master in which all the separate themes and the sub-themes are taken up and woven together into one great climax. And your life is a part of that song that God is playing here. And so our benediction today is a poem called Discerning the Tune by Malcolm Guite, and it just fits so perfectly today. A kind of tune, a music everywhere and nowhere, love's long, lovely undersong. A trace in time, a grace note in the air, born to us from the place where we belong. Oh, every passing breeze and in the breath of every creature, all things hear and fear. For faintly through our fall, we too may hear the strong song of the sun that undoes death. And one day we will hear it unimpaired, the joy of all the sorrowful, the song of all the saints who cry, how long, the hidden hope of all who have despaired. He sang it to his mother in the womb, and now it echoes from his empty tomb. Discerning the Tune by Malcolm Guite.